Destiny rules everything. Sometimes it seems to a person that nothing else can happen in his measured life. Everything has settled down, there is a family, work, some well-established personal interests. Habitual circle of friends and girlfriends, officially allowed to you. Equal relations in the family. Loving wife and daughter. That's what I thought. I was sure that by the age of 40 my life is quite established and nothing forebodes any change. I married quite early, in my 20s, to a remarkably beautiful girl with a name unusual for our places, Michelle. She was a slender, brown-haired girl with piercing blue eyes. She was a year younger than me, which was a favorable age balance for starting a family. A year later my daughter Marina was born. We stopped there, having decided that enough children were born. I was in the army, and our wanderings in garrisons did not contribute to our family. I had to fight a little during my service and, as a consequence, received an order and a splinter in my back. I hid the order far away in a closet and carried only the shrapnel, which periodically reminded me of itself. The shrapnel was inoperable and was lodged somewhere in the spine, squeezing a nerve, which caused severe pain in my back. The doctors gave me a discouraging prognosis. With the lapse of time my legs might fail. I was discharged from the army because of sickness and got a job as a schoolteacher. But my pedagogical activity didn't last long. After a while my left leg began to grow numb and dry. It lost sensitivity and stopped bending. I could move, but with great difficulty and with the help of a stick. I had to quit my job and go on disability. I could see perfectly well that my condition stressed my wife and daughter. Michelle became irritable, snapped at any trifle. She began to stay late at work, sometimes coming home smelling of alcohol. The prospect of living with an invalid husband clearly did not inspire her. My daughter, too, reduced her contact with me to a minimum, which, in principle, was also quite understandable. In the last month my wife had not come home several times, explaining it by urgent and unexpected business trips. At first she somehow tried to explain her absences, but then she just started to tell me to go away. I knew perfectly well that my wife had found a replacement for me and was waiting for an opportunity to leave. I did not clarify the relationship, everything was clear as it was. It remained only to wait for the denouement. And it came. It all happened one rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed that life-changing events happen on rainy autumn evenings? It's as if dying nature is trying to drag you down with it. That evening I was at home as usual, my wife and daughter were still out. The doorbell rang and a middle-aged, well-groomed guy smelling of expensive perfume appeared on the doorstep. A typical member of the tribe of men who are a cross between an ATM machine and a vibrator. "Hello. Shall I come in?" He switched to you from the doorstep. I moved aside, letting the uninvited guest in. "We have to talk, let's sit in the kitchen." He knew his way around our apartment. "Let's skip the preamble. Michelle and I love each other and we want to be together." "How long have you been in love?" For some reason I was not much surprised. 6 months now. She feels sorry for you and doesn't dare to leave you. Let her go, don't ruin her life. By the way, all this time your daughter is aware of the events and does not judge her mother. The guest took out a cigarette. "You're an invalid, you shouldn't ruin a young woman's life. Here," he smoked and handed me an envelope, "consider it as compensation for the years lived with Michelle. It's enough for you for a long time." I looked at him in silence and thought about the fact that if I hit him between the eyes, he would immediately lose his gloss and assertiveness, and then add a couple more kicks. Yes, it's not harmful to dream. And then I stood up, leaning on my stick, letting him know that the conversation was over. "I think you will make the right decision." It seems that he felt something, so he put the envelope on the table and quickly left the apartment. That's how it happened. Kind of mundane, even. I expected a surge of emotion, anger, despair. But alas, I was apparently ready for such a turn of events. It remained only to wait for my wife and close the subject. Michelle and Marina arrived at about 9 o'clock in the evening. Once upon a time long ago my wife used to kiss me on the cheek after my return from work. But lately she limited herself to a dry nod. I sat in the kitchen and wished only one thing, that it would all be over sooner. Michelle knew about the visit of her lover, so she started without any preambles. "Husband, our life together has become unbearable lately," she began. But I did not let her finish. "Don't, Michelle. I know all about her ruined youth and difficulties of life with an invalid husband. Let's not make a scene, let's not get into it." I stood up. My daughter stood looking at me in silence without saying a word. But in her eyes I read pity mixed with squeamishness. It was clear, the father was an invalid, even worse than the invalid husband. I went out into the corridor, put on my coat, then returned to the kitchen and silently pushed the envelope with the money in Michelle's direction. She turned her head and looked at me with empty alien eyes. "This is your compensation for the years you've lived with me." I took my valise and silently walked out of the apartment. No one held me back. It was late autumn. Rain was falling, which added to my already low spirits. I felt no despair for what had happened, for I had evidently been ready for such a turn of events. There were no special thoughts in my mind, I just walked silently along the wet houses. I had to get on with my life somehow. There was only one question at the moment: where? The apartment belonged to Michelle, and I had no chance to sue for a corner there. And frankly, I had no desire to. I took out my phone and called my army friend. Luckily he answered quickly and agreed to put me up for a while. My phone beeped. I looked at the screen and saw a new message. My former roommate Pauline asked me to call her back right away. I dialed her number and immediately heard a familiar voice. "Ted, hello. Leonid and I are leaving tomorrow to visit Nina in Haifa. We've sold everything except the antique store. I'm very indebted to your grandmother, and I've decided to leave the store to you. You know the address, and all the paperwork is on the desk. Mira, a distant relative of mine, works there and she will explain everything to you. Hello to Michelle and Marina. Kisses." She passed out. Frankly, I was a little taken aback. It seemed that my fate today for the first time sat on a bike and immediately began to make zigzags. The question of the rest of my life was settled. I was not aware of what Pauline was so obliged to my grandmother, but apparently the service rendered was so important that she did not hesitate to give her grandson, that is me, an antique store. I decided not to hurry and spend the night at a friend's house today, and tomorrow to go to the Now My store. Antique store I found quickly. It was in the miracle-preserved old two-story house, squeezed on both sides stylized in the old buildings. The sign on the facade was very laconic: antiques. Sale, purchase, expertise. At the front door hung a neat sign open. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Somewhere in the back of the store a bell rang. A young black-haired woman came out from behind the counter, and with a friendly smile asked, "What can I do for you?" "Hello, I'm Ted." "Nice to meet you, I'm Mira. Aunt Paulina told me about you. Let's go into the office, and I'll show you all the documents for the store." She made an inviting gesture. We entered a small corridor, at the end of which there was a staircase leading to the second floor. But Mira opened a side door, and I saw a small room which seemed to be an office. There were several cases of porcelain along the walls. A rug hung picturesquely on the free wall, on which was a collection of antique weapons. In one of the display cases I saw an antique helmet with a half-mask and a beret. I had been reading a lot lately, including a lot about antique weapons, so I remembered some of the terms. In the center of the room stood a massive carved table with an armchair. On the tabletop was a black leather folder. Mira opened it. "Here is the deed to the store. All the taxes are paid, you just need to sign the document here and here," she pointed with a thin finger where. "And the store is yours." In half an hour the notary arrived and the transfer procedure was completed. I leaned my stick against the table and slowly sank into a chair. "Mira, what are your future plans? Will you stay here to work or will you leave?" I looked at the woman. "I would like to stay if you do not mind," she smiled. "Well, on the contrary, I'll be very grateful to you, especially since I know nothing about antiques. On the second floor is an apartment. True, it is small, just one room and a kitchen." Mira gave me a stick. "It belongs to the store, so it also belongs to you." We went up the wooden stairs to the second floor. Behind the door was a fairly spacious room and an adjoining kitchenette, equipped with all the kitchen appliances. There was also a bathroom and a toilet. Well, This was my shelter for years to come, and it was where I would spend the time that fate intended when I finally lost the ability to move. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll make you some coffee. Mira went into the kitchen. Mira, where do you live? I've been watching her finesse at the stove. I used to live here, but then I rented a room. It's not far from the store. We open at 10, so it's very convenient for me. She poured coffee into a little porcelain cup and put it in front of me. And so began my career as an antique dealer. I tried to learn all the secrets of the new profession. Together with Mira, I went to clients for evaluation and expertise. On weekends we disappeared at the local flea market. She taught me and showed me in practice how to find a valuable thing in a pile of old junk. I began to look at the world around me with different eyes, trying to find something valuable in it. Realistically, I became fascinated by the world of antiques, and, without even realizing it, by Mira. I liked everything about her. And her Jewish prudence, calmness, discreet beauty, and gentle nature. Especially beautiful was her soul, a pure and bright person. But I was afraid to let her see it, or to hint at it in any way. My future was bleak, nothing good awaited me there. Why would a young woman need a paralytic? So I drove away from my self-sudden feelings. I began to read a lot of special literature, and my training bore fruit. Little by little I began to understand porcelain. By marks I unmistakably determined at what factory this or that thing was made. How much to buy it and at what price I could sell it later. I had regular customers. And the day came when I ordered business cards. The card had only my name, profession, and my new phone number, Ted, Antiques. My new business was getting better. Everything was going well, everything except my health. The doctor's prognosis was beginning to come true. My left leg was completely paralyzed, so it was going to a wheelchair. I was anxiously waiting for the disease to spread to my right leg. During all this time Michelle and Marina never called me. True, a month later, after I left, Michelle's lawyer called me and offered to sign the divorce papers. He came to my store and I signed everything Michelle wanted. I never heard from my former family again. They had finally severed all relations with me. I held no grudge against them, but the betrayal of my own daughter left a bleeding wound in my heart. One cold May evening, after a bad day, I sat by the fireplace to warm myself. Mira had already gone home. I closed the store and settled in my study. I didn't feel like reading or watching anything. I poured myself a whiskey and decided to relax a little. Suddenly someone knocked on the door of the store. When I reached the door, I saw an elderly woman with a roll in her hands. "Woman, we are closed, come back tomorrow." I was about to close the door. "Young man, I won't keep you. I am leaving tomorrow morning. And I need money urgently. I think you will buy it." The woman looked me straight in the eye, and I involuntarily took a step aside and let her in the store. It's a travel box, early 19th century. I don't even know how it ended up in my family. "I have no use for it, so I came to offer it to you," she said as she unwrapped the bundle. "Do you want me to appraise it, or are you selling it?" "Both." She carefully set the ivory-encrusted, lacquered wooden box on the table. "Well, what do you think?" "It's very beautiful, and it's worth a lot of money. I don't know why I said a sum of 1.5 times the real value of the box." The woman smiled. "Well, I agree." The woman had long since left, but I kept looking at the box and opening and closing the lid as if mesmerized, admiring the beauty of the finish. Then I took all the drawers out of the box and began to gently tap the walls, carefully checking the grooves in which they were attached. It looks like it has a secret, I thought, but what is the secret and how do I find it? While I was doing this, I didn't notice how morning came. There was still no result. In the afternoon, I continued to study the box with even greater zeal. I carefully studied it inch by inch. I slid the drawers in and out many times. I tapped the bottom, the lid, the walls, but it was in vain. The secret would not come out. I had no doubt it was there. At that time, no jewelry box like this was produced by craftsmen without hidden compartments. Such boxes were used as a necessary travel item when traveling frequently in stagecoaches or carriages. It simply had to have such a nook, invisible to the eyes of strangers, where important documents, Money and valuables were kept. Another day went by, and the box never revealed its secret. I became angry. There was even a moment when I wanted to hit the box on the floor. But I tried to calm down and start all over again. I tapped the box again, opened one half of the drawers and pressed the walls, the bottom and the lid. But all in vain. The cash was undetectable. The night without sleep had done its work. Tiredness drove me away. Sleep crept up unnoticed. It overtook me at the table on which the box stood. I dreamed that I had found the secret of the box and opened the secret compartment. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. It's a pity to break it. I'll put an appropriate price. Who knows about such things? We'll buy it. But still I decided to try it one last time. I tried to imagine the movement of the owner to open the secret compartment. I moved the box toward me and pressed the lid with both hands. There was a crackling sound, and with a quiet rustle, the right latch swung open. It was so sudden that I even recoiled. Wow, it's so simple. In the stash that opened was a small bundle wrapped in a white flap. I carefully unwrapped the cloth. In the flap of cloth were several silver coins, blackened by time, and a ring. I placed it carefully in the palm of my hand, trying to gauge its weight. It was very old and seemed to be made of silver. The thing was, it was obviously a man's ring. And in the old days, silver was considered a masculine metal, unlike gold, a feminine metal. Men who risked wearing gold jewelry risked being misunderstood by their contemporaries. Later, however, everything changed, and jewelry made of gold began to be worn by men as well. But even nowadays, understanding men will never wear gold jewelry. I took a magnifying glass and looked closely at the ring. The beast's snout with its mouth open looked very impressive. The eyes of the predator were skillfully inset with black amethysts, a very rare variety of this semi-precious stone. The finest carvings, hundreds of minute strokes, every wrinkle, every crease seemed to be reflected, all made the beast's muzzle almost alive. The stripes, the grin, the fangs. I scrutinized the ring, and the eyes. They seemed too meaningful. I pushed the ring away. Surely this is the look of a tiger. The beast's muzzled face was finely jeweled. But how had this masterpiece ended up in the box? Who had made it, and to whom did it belong? The tarnished silver was almost devoid of the usual scuffs and scratches that come with this kind of jewelry. There was only one small flaw, a nick that I thought might have come from a blow with a sword or axe. I couldn't take my eyes off the unusual ring, and deep down inside, I was suddenly afraid. I could not understand what it was. And suddenly I got it, the eyes. The eyes of an enraged tiger. They were like alive, and their pupils were lit up, with black light streaming out of them. And they weren't looking away from me, they were looking right into my soul. These eyes burned through. Suddenly it was hard to breathe, my heart was pounding under my throat, fear came up from its hidden depths, and with sticky clutches seized and bound my whole body. I shook my head trying to pull myself together. It was an obsession, a vapor. It seems to me that the elaborately made monster is examining me, as if getting acquainted. In fact, the tiny, meticulously slit eyes are simply filled with incredibly bright black amethysts. But why can't I turn away from this mesmerizing gaze? Suddenly, I involuntarily put the ring on the ring finger of my right hand. Immediately it felt hot. The heat went up my arm to my shoulder and spread all over my body. My heart began to pound even harder. I began to fall into a bottomless well. And a moment later, everything was gone. I was sound asleep. I woke up in pain. My left leg was very painful. It pulsed and whined and throbbed and gnawed at my thigh. My left leg, which had been paralyzed for 6 months. I put my hands on the tabletop and tried to stand up. With my feet I felt the cold that was streaming across the floor. Holding onto the back of the chair and the tabletop, I tried to reach for my stick. I caught it awkwardly, and it fell, hitting my left foot. I involuntarily jerked my foot away. The stick was hurting me. My leg was coming back to life. I could even wiggle my toes a little. And then my gaze was drawn to my right hand. From the ring finger the coal-black eyes of a grinning white tiger looked at me. Only the grin seemed to me not too frightening, on the contrary, the tiger was smiling. 1.5 years passed. My business was well established. I enjoyed steady authority among colleagues, antique dealers, and customers. I managed to expand the business by opening 2 more stores in our city and a large antique showroom in the capital. I did not walk with a limp, but the habit of even carrying a cane, which gave me more charm. Doctors vied with each other to tell me that it was a miracle, that this just could not be. I listened to them, just smiling, looking at the ring with the tiger. My splinter no longer clamped the nerve, and after a simple operation was removed. And finally I married Mira. And she managed to give me a wonderful daughter. We lived in a country house, but with nostalgia I remembered a small apartment above the antique store, where everything began. Fate gave me the opportunity to meet Michelle. One day I got a call and a woman's voice asked me to appraise the jewelry. I am not a jeweler, and I wanted to refuse right away. But the voice sounded familiar. And when the woman gave me her address, I recognized Michelle. It's strange, she should be in the Bahamas by now. We made an appointment, and at the appointed hour I rang the familiar doorbell. Michelle barely changed, only her sparkling eyes seemed to have faded. She was wrapped in a handkerchief, holding it to her throat. "Ted?" She moved aside, letting me in. She said, "Please come in." She wanted to invite me into the room, but I asked for the kitchen, with which I had a lot to do. I sat down at the kitchen table, like 2.5 years ago. "Michelle." She looked at me. "Have I changed that much?" "Ted?" With surprise, she even stood up. I understood her. By her calculations, I should have long ago dragged a miserable life in some orphanage. But how? "Have you recovered?" "As you can see," I smiled. "I can't say that I'm glad to see you. I don't like to go back to a place where I was hurt." It was as if Michelle had a breakthrough. She told me that she lived with her new husband for about a year. And then he left her and went to live abroad with Marina, just like her mother. Everything is just awful. It's such a tragedy when you're betrayed by your own children. Really, how would I know that? She is now alone. Marina is far away and does not communicate with her. And the fact that I am with her today is probably fate. And then the eternal theme of women. Forgive me, I'm a bitch. I've always loved only you. Stay with me. I listened to her wailing and didn't say anything. I had nothing to say to her. You know, I didn't revel in her grief or gloat. I even felt sorry for her in a way. But the visit had to come to an end. And that's when my phone rang. My wife called and asked where to pick me up. I gave her the address and said goodbye. "Is that your wife?" Michelle asked quietly, and her eyes began to fill with tears. "Yes." "And how long have you been married?" "Yes, for almost 2 years now." I stood up and took my cane. "Goodbye, Michelle, try to be happy." "Well, that's all, I guess. All is well with me. I have a lovely wife, a daughter, and a job. My future seems cloudless to me. But I know for sure. Everything can change at any moment. Destiny rules everything. That is why I never take off my ring with a white tiger. Story 2. Have you ever experienced betrayal? I hope not. It's a dreadful sensation that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Unfortunately, I had to personally confront it, and it would have been acceptable if it were a minor transgression. After all, everyone makes mistakes. But what occurred in my life, and how my closest acquaintances deceived me, that's something else entirely. I assure you, those involved in this will deeply regret it. This is my narrative. Enjoy hearing it. My name is Todd, and I consider myself quite attractive and intelligent, with a healthy self-esteem. I work as a programmer for a commercial company and have achieved a certain level of success. It's quite remarkable that I can work just 50 minutes a week and still earn a substantial income. However, it doesn't mean I'm idle the rest of the time. I'm constantly learning and developing new skills daily. I'm the one who turned my life around. I've read numerous motivational books, watched interviews with successful individuals, and pulled myself out of poverty. Consequently, I value everything I have, and every day, I express gratitude for my blessings. Yet perhaps my most significant achievement in life is my wife, Judith, who is 4 years my junior. She's 25, and I'm 29. Judith works as a model, participating in various advertising campaigns and boasting a substantial following on social media. She thoroughly enjoys her life. Judith possesses a slender, sun-kissed physique with well-toned thighs and an appealing bust. However, this wasn't always the case. Meeting me had a profound impact on her life. Initially, she worked as an ordinary cashier in a store with no particular aspirations or objectives. However, I detected a spark within her and played a part in kindling it. Even back then, I held a decent position, and though my income wasn't as substantial as it is today, I could afford a comfortable lifestyle. At my encouragement, Judith left her cashier job, and I helped her connect with a capable producer who aided her in achieving success on social media. Our combined earnings now enable us to enjoy a lavish lifestyle. This might come across as a typical success story or something of the sort, and to be honest, I thought the same initially. Until reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I have two friends from my school days, Philip and Alan, who were by my side up to a certain point. At the age of 18, we ventured into our first business, an ice cream stand. Unfortunately, it didn't thrive and went under within 6 months. We attempted another business selling hot dogs but had to shut it down after just 5 months. Subsequent endeavors were equally unsuccessful. At the age of 21, I came to the realization that something needed to change. I ventured into the IT field, which was unfamiliar territory for me, but I recognized its potential. My friends didn't support my decision, insisting it was a waste of time. You should engage in tangible pursuits and create something of your own, not work for someone else, they said. I disagreed because I was thinking ahead. I understood that becoming a proficient specialist would eventually empower me to launch my own project, and that's precisely how it unfolded. Philip and Alan persist in their attempts to establish a business. Currently, they manage a single fast food stand that has been operational for 3 years, generating a modest profit they divide between themselves. However, when compared to my earnings, their profit seems insignificant. Instead of exploring new opportunities and progressing, they, like determined sheep, continue to focus on a single endeavor. While they have achieved some success, I suspect it may not be the outcome they had envisioned. As I enjoy the financial freedom to travel to various countries, purchase expensive clothing and automobiles, dine in fine restaurants, and have a wife with model-like looks, these two remain in the city, grappling with the daily stress of their business. I hold no resentment towards them for choosing not to join me. It was their decision, and I respect it. We still maintain a connection, although it's not as close as it once was. They are welcome to visit my home on weekends, relax on my leather couch, and engage in activities like playing video games and discussing ordinary matters together. Despite our disparities, we maintain a strong relationship and frequently meet, usually at my residence. They appreciated my opulent home, but it didn't immediately dawn on me that my wife also captivated their attention. To me, gatherings with Philip and Alan served as a form of diversion. They were unassuming individuals without formal education, and I appreciated the ability to sit down with them, share a beer, and engage in light-hearted conversations. I made no effort to flaunt my achievements in their presence. On the contrary, I aimed to relate to them on a down-to-earth level. Judith never objected to me spending a couple of evenings each week with my friends. She had her own circle of girlfriends, and she frequently socialized with them. Our home was always bustling with activity due to our hospitable nature. On one evening, as I was heading back home, I was halted by our neighbor, Jimmy, who happened to be a director. He greeted me and asked, "Todd, how's everything going?" I don't want to intrude, and please don't think I'm prying, but I've noticed something unusual. When you're not around, there's often a Ford parked near your house. I even took a photo of it. I took his phone and examined the picture, which showed a white Ford, my friend Philip's car. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Jefferson. I'll look into what's happening." "You're welcome." "Oh, wait, can I ask you for a favor? When you're at home during the day, could you keep an eye on my house? If you happen to spot that car, please let me know." This was undeniably a concerning situation that couldn't be disregarded. Why was my friend visiting my wife while I was at work? With this question in mind, I entered the house where Judith warmly welcomed me. She was wearing a white robe and, without uttering a word, began, "Darling, I'm delighted you're home. I have a surprise for you. You need to pull this string." I pulled the string, unveiling a piece of artwork before me. Judith had acquired a new seductive costume, a nurse's outfit. "I think you might be a bit tired, but I know how to remedy that. First, you should take a shower, and then I'll be waiting for you in my medical office." I swiftly took a shower, and Judith and I shared an unforgettable night. Such spontaneity caused all my worries to vanish, and I wholeheartedly embraced the moment. The following day, I had no prior commitments, which meant that Judith and I would have the entire day together. I pondered whether Philip might have dropped by yesterday to retrieve something he had forgotten and just made a brief visit. That's what I preferred to believe. I didn't want to entertain the thought that Judith could be unfaithful to me, especially with my friend. Judith and I had a rather ordinary day, and in the evening, we had plans to unwind by watching a movie. However, our intentions were disrupted by Alan, who wanted to invite us somewhere. "How about going to the club tonight? It'll be a blast. You can bring Judith along." I declined the offer, not only because Judith and I had our own plans for the evening, but also because I didn't particularly enjoy going to clubs, and I knew Judith would find it unexciting. Since Philip and Alan didn't have girlfriends, Philip had made attempts at relationships and even got married, but in the end, he cheated on his wife, leading to their separation. Alan, on the other hand, had encountered misfortune with his relationships, and the longest one had lasted only a year. I repeatedly advised them that if they wanted to go out together, they needed to find girlfriends. They would simply nod in agreement and assure me they'd find someone soon. I informed Judith about Alan's invitation and detected her disappointment. It seemed she was eager to go out and have some fun, though I didn't pay it much heed. The following day, Judy called, and I had to head to work. I bid Judith farewell with a kiss and left around noon. My neighbor, Jimmy, phoned to inform me, "Todd, there's a car parked near your house again. I can't pinpoint the exact time, but I thought I'd give you a heads up." "Thanks, Jimmy. How long will you be at home?" "All day." "All right, if it's not too much trouble, could you give me a call once you notice that the car has departed?" "Sure, I'll keep you posted." We exchanged pleasantries, and my mind was once again flooded with doubts. 5 hours had elapsed since Jimmy's call, and throughout this duration, I remained in a state of uncertainty. Suddenly, the phone rang. "Todd, the car's leaving." 2 men got in, Jimmy informed me. I expressed my gratitude to Jimmy and hung up. Now there were no lingering doubts. My 2 friends were visiting my wife when I was absent. While initially I had suspected it was only Philip, I now realized that Alan was also involved. At first, I attempted to console myself with the idea that perhaps they were preparing an early surprise for my upcoming birthday, which was still 4 months away. Wasn't it too premature to prevent undue panic? I decided to reach out to an acquaintance and requested a couple of video cameras and a listening device. After finishing work, I collected the equipment. When asked why I needed it, I fabricated an excuse, stating it wasn't for personal use. As I drove home, my hands trembled. I even felt a sense of shame for resorting to spying on my wife, due to my unwavering conviction that she couldn't betray me. Upon entering the house, Judith greeted me with joy. We enjoyed a delicious meal and later retired to bed for another intimate encounter. Throughout this time, I failed to detect anything unusual about her. Typically, when a woman is unfaithful to a man, her behavior and demeanor change, but my wife remained her usual self, perhaps even better. The following morning, Judith prepared for a promotional video shoot, and I accompanied her. In the back seat of my car, there was a bag containing the forgotten video cameras. During the journey, Judith inquired about them. "What's that you got there, kiddo?" she asked. "It's some work-related stuff. I need to discard it later when I leave," I replied. With this explanation, I managed to address 2 concerns at once. While Judith was occupied with her work, I made my way back home. Time flew by, and I failed to notice that 2 hours had slipped away. Nevertheless, I successfully set up all the cameras, one in the bedroom, another in the living room, a third in the kitchen, and a 4th one outside. In my preoccupation, I completely forgot that I was supposed to pick up Judith. Stepping out of the house, I suddenly spotted a white Ford pulling up, and to my surprise, both Judith and Philip emerged from the car. Judith wasted no time in expressing her frustration, stating, "I called you 20 times. Where were you disappearing to, Todd?" I quickly checked my phone and confirmed her claim with the presence of 20 missed calls from her. I promptly offered my apologies, but Judith walked past me in silence. It was then that Philip approached. "Dude, you messed up big time, and I had to handle things myself," he remarked. "Sorry, I just got caught up. It was an urgent call, and I needed to address a project," I explained. "All right, no big deal. I can help you out, considering how many times you've bailed me out," Philip generously offered. We bid our farewells, and I retreated back into the house. The entire evening unfolded in a somber atmosphere. Judith remained upset with me for failing to pick her up, so I made several attempts to apologize. "You promised to pick me up. Why didn't you come?" she reproached me. I expressed my remorse, saying, "There was an urgent order. Forgive me. I won't let it happen again." We eventually reconciled, sharing a hug before retiring to bed. I felt deeply ashamed of suspecting her of any wrongdoing. While I hadn't entirely believed the accusations, I couldn't ignore Jimmy's photographs. Thus, I felt compelled to personally verify everything. During the night, while Judith slumbered, I made the decision to unlock her phone and inspect her messages. I found nothing suspicious in Judith's messages. Her phone appeared clean. With a clear conscience, I retired to sleep. 2 weeks had elapsed since I'd installed cameras in my home. While I was at work, I diligently observed Judith's activities, and all seemed well. No hints of anything suspicious. Following that initial night, I continued to sporadically check Judith's phone a couple of times, and it consistently remained clean. There were no indications of infidelity or communication with my friends. Life proceeded normally. We enjoyed quality time with Philip and Alan, explored the city, visited interesting places, and generally led a peaceful existence. One day at work, I reluctantly decided to review the camera footage. I had grown weary of this routine, recognizing that each time I found nothing, rendering it seemingly pointless. Other thoughts began to plague me, pondering the possibility that Judith might discover the cameras, interpreting my actions as a lack of trust in her. As I gazed at the camera feed, I witnessed Judith opening the door, an unexpected sight. I activated the outdoor camera and spotted a white Ford parked near my house, with Philip and Alan standing on the porch. Judith warmly welcomed my friends, and they entered. I discreetly unplugged the listening device, which had been placed in the living room beneath the coffee table. Judith proceeded upstairs to the bedroom, while Philip and Alan removed their shirts, lounging bare-chested on the couch. Judith then retrieved a provocative costume from the wardrobe, the same one she had worn for me the previous night. I watched their activities closely, pondering my course of action. It had become evident that it was time to deal with this situation, quite literally taking out the trash. I initiated a call to an individual with an untraceable number, whose identity couldn't be disclosed, but for our purposes, let's refer to him as Mr. Keller. He specialized in discreetly handling requested disposal of undesirable matters. I phoned Mr. Keller, recounting the entire distressing situation, my voice quivering, and the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. "Understood. Meet us at the payment spot, and once payment is made, the vehicle will proceed to your residence for the task," Mr. Keller replied. Our conversation was succinct, and the cost for such a service was substantial. I needed to hasten to the designated payment location. Fortunately, I had sufficient cash in my car for this service. I decided to review the camera feed and observed my wife already engaged in intimate acts with my friends. Nausea welled up within me because, had I not uncovered this, I would have returned home in the evening oblivious to the betrayal. I drove recklessly, feeling as though I had lost control of myself. Tremors coursed through me, and I feared I might faint. Overwhelmed by anguish, I even shed a tear. I couldn't fathom how my childhood friends and my wife could betray me like this. I swiftly reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned building. My task was to leave an envelope containing the payment, so I discreetly placed it under a stone and sent a confirmation message. Almost immediately, I received a response. My chicks flew out of the nest. I rushed back home, parking the car nearby, and began observing from a distance. Glancing at my phone, I received a call from Jimmy reporting a white Ford near my house. I assured him that everything was under control. Resuming the camera feed, I witnessed two men enjoying my wife on my leather couch, an agonizing sight that felt akin to watching an explicit film. The pain resurfaced, but I sensed that justice would soon prevail. Approximately 10 minutes after my return home, a white van pulled up. 3 burly men clad entirely in black attire, with balaclavas concealing their faces, swiftly stormed into my house. One of them incapacitated Philip with a single blow, another subdued Alan, and the third silenced Judith. They were forced to the floor, their hands bound, bags placed over their heads, and promptly loaded into the van, which sped away. I bore witness to the sequence of events through the surveillance cameras, marveling at their efficiency and professionalism. The task was accomplished in approximately 40 seconds. All that remained for me was to patiently await the results over the next couple of days. To be cautious, I decided to consult my neighbor to check if he had witnessed anything unusual. Fortunately, he hadn't observed anything out of the ordinary. Upon my return from work that evening, I contacted the police and reported my wife as missing. Prior to this, I had taken the precaution of disabling and disposing of the phones belonging to Judith and my friends, rendering them untraceable. The following day, a tow truck removed the white Ford from my residence. I informed the police that, as usual, I had come home to find my wife missing without any discernible clues. All the neighbors in the vicinity provided their statements, corroborating the frequent presence of the white Ford near my house when I wasn't present. To my surprise, it wasn't only Jimmy who had spotted this car near my residence. Since the vehicle was registered under Philip's name, he emerged as the primary suspect. Initially, I too fell under suspicion, but a verification call to my workplace confirmed that I hadn't left on the day of the disappearance. While the investigation was ongoing, I diligently backed up all the camera recordings onto a concealed disk. For days later, I received an anonymous video depicting the delivery of 3 individuals to a specified location. The video showed them being unloaded from a van with their eyes, hands, and feet bound in an empty field. All 3 were in tears, pleading for mercy. And I derived a peculiar sense of satisfaction from watching them, considering my primary stipulation that no one should lose their life. They were left in the desert with their hands unbound and instructed to remain stationary for an hour. Subsequent to this, the vehicle departed, and their fate became solely their responsibility. They were transported in a van from Nevada to Texas, and at that juncture, I no longer harbored any concern regarding their prospects of returning alive. A month later, the investigation reached an impasse, and the detective proposed the theory that my wife might have eloped with Philip, engaging in an extramarital affair. I acknowledged this possibility. Alan, on the other hand, was not pursued since he lacked parents or even a significant other, and their shared business had crumbled with no one tending to it for a month. Opting against an immediate divorce, which might arouse suspicion, I retained legal counsel and initiated the legal proceedings. In the event Judith failed to return home within a couple of months, we could initiate divorce proceedings on the grounds of her unexplained absence. A month later, I was summoned to the police station for an identification procedure. They presented me with a photograph featuring 2 men and 1 woman, none of whom I immediately recognized as my wife and 2 friends. They appeared to have aged far beyond their actual years, which I found somewhat ironic. They were dressed in tattered, threadbare attire, appearing emaciated and overall in dire condition. I positively identified all 3 individuals and inquired about their whereabouts. The investigator explained that in Texas, a couple of disheveled individuals had perpetrated a gas station robbery while in the nude, stolen another person's vehicle, and subsequently driven off in an unknown direction. Precisely 24 hours later, the abandoned car was discovered at the roadside. Curiously, they had stolen a vehicle with an empty fuel tank, rendering their escape short-lived. Eventually, they were apprehended and are presently serving prison sentences. I sighed in relief, reflecting. At least they're still alive. This outcome had not been anticipated. I had assumed they possessed enough common sense to safely make their way back home. Instead, driven by desperation, they had resorted to criminal acts. It horrified me to realize that these individuals had been a significant part of my life, and I didn't harbor any sympathy for them. Honestly, who could feel sorry for them? I successfully obtained a divorce, and while I can't describe it as an easy feat, I did manage to achieve it, officially gaining my freedom. I made a trip to Texas once with the intention of looking each of them in the eye, the very people who had betrayed me. All three of them appeared entirely disoriented, but the most intriguing aspect was that none of them even suspected my involvement. Not a single one considered the possibility of this being retribution for their betrayal. And it somewhat saddened me that they failed to grasp the gravity of their transgressions against me. It brought me satisfaction to remain in the shadows. Yet, as I observed these individuals, they seemed utterly unfamiliar to me. They were lost souls. When I directly questioned Judith about her betrayal, she responded quietly, "Never." I merely smiled and walked away. Frankly, I had expected some resistance. I thought they would return home and recognize me as the one who sent them into the desert. However, they proved to be so feeble, so foolish, that they only deepened their predicament. I had provided them an opportunity to reveal their character under duress, but instead, they exhibited cowardice and opted for criminal acts. I can't say how I would have acted in their situation, but I can say this much: I wouldn't have found myself in such dire circumstances. I value the people in my life, maintain respect, and always adhere to the truth. However, if someone crosses me, I won't remain passive. I will take action. I've relocated to Florida and plan to reside here for at least a year. If I happen to find a girlfriend, that's fine. If not, that's perfectly acceptable too. I've adopted a more relaxed approach to life. I possess enough financial security to live comfortably throughout my old age without depriving myself of anything. I'm a prudent and intelligent individual, constantly evolving. My desire is for everyone who hears my story to evolve as well, regardless of their circumstances, and to make the right choices for their own lives. When life hurls challenges your way, see them as opportunities to clean up. Trash belongs in the bin, not in your life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. This concludes the tale. As for the questions you posed, the protagonist's wife was likely unfaithful to him with his friends for an extended period, as she had learned to conceal her emotions and conduct her infidelity discreetly. Unlike his friends, her infidelity appears to have been systematic, and it is estimated to have begun approximately a year ago. The motive behind her betrayal seems rather straightforward. The rapid transition from poverty to affluence may have compelled her to seek new experiences. Regarding who initiated the transgression, it's believed to be the wife, although the friends might have also pressed the matter, potentially fueled by jealousy and a desire to compensate for their own shortcomings. As for the protagonist's response, he opted for a severe form of retribution. It's undeniably harsh, yet he perceives it as just, akin to clearing away garbage. While he expresses some remorse, he ultimately finds solace in his actions. Nevertheless, we believe there were alternative, gentler approaches available, potentially within the bounds of the law. Your insights in the comments would be greatly appreciated as they assist us in improving and selecting only the finest stories. Story 3. In August 2022, after 15 years of marriage, my relationship faced significant challenges. We grappled with issues in communication, finances, and intimacy, adding strain to our already hectic lives. My wife often held me responsible for our troubles. In an attempt to address these issues, my wife proposed a trial separation. We had 3 kids aged 11, 13, and 15, making this decision particularly difficult, especially considering our daughters' ages. Within 2 weeks of the separation, my 15-year-old daughter confided in me, expressing her suspicion that my wife might be involved in an affair. During this period, my wife suggested that I stay with a single friend who had experienced a divorce and had ample space. While I wasn't thrilled about the idea, I consented to maintain a peaceful atmosphere at home. Experiencing constant arguments, I didn't want my children to endure the kind of tumultuous household I grew up in, marked by my parents' conflicts. My 13 and 15-year-old daughters weren't pleased with